through creating cinemagraphs with Photoshop. So what you're really going to learn to do is combine video and photo to create a mesmerizing and immersive photo experience. So I know nothing about that. I'm not the guy you want to hear and talk to. That's not why you're all here. So I will happily hand it over to Chris here, who's going to present and give us everything we need to go. So Chris, why don't you take it away, my friend?
Excellent. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. So so we're going to be talking about cinemagraphs, how to make these with Photoshop. So one of the things that I want to be covering for you guys today is showing you a bunch of different things you can do inside of Photoshop. You're probably familiar with things like layers and smart objects, but if you use smart objects with the timeline panel, you can start to create animations and do a lot of things with motion inside of Photoshop. So I want to unlock a bunch of different sort of aspects of Photoshop for you. So a cinemagraph is basically a made-up word. It doesn't really exist. Different people have their own sort of ideas on what that is and what it means. So for me, I just sort of define it as combining cinematography with photography. And the reason that cinemagraphs have remained so popular, we saw the first couple in early 90s. What they do is they basically take a photograph and they add this motion to it that grabs our attention. By nature, we are drawn to things that move. And so once something's moving, it grabs our attention. The problem with video, however, is video is a linear format, which means if you've got a message that takes 10 seconds from the beginning to the end of the video, you have to watch it for 10 seconds to get the full meaning of the video. Photography, as you may be aware, you get 1,000 words a second. That's what people have said for many years. You look at a photograph and you instantly get tone, you get the composition, the structure of the photograph, you know where they are, who's in it, all that kind of stuff. You get flooded with all of this information immediately. So the whole goal of cinemagraphs is to combine that immediacy of photography with something that's got some motion to grab your attention. In today's world where we have so much social media and we are seeing thousands and thousands of ads and messages every day, this is a really effective way to grab someone's attention, tell them a whole bunch of stuff, and just get that done incredibly quickly. So I'm going to be showing you how we can do some of that inside of Photoshop today. And so, like I said, cinemagraphs, you are seeing these everywhere. You're seeing them on billboards, ads, social media feeds, and there's a bunch of different ways that you can put a cinemagraph together. And this goes back to the definition of this fake word. So for me, I think of a cinemagraph as more of an experience. So I want to, again, see mostly static photograph. I want to get a message really quick and then see something interesting to look at. There are tons of different sort of techniques that you can use to get this done. And I'm going to show you a couple of those today. One would be just starting with straight video. So you start with something that's got a natural sort of motion or loop to it, like water or snow or a swimming pool here. Other examples, we'll take a video and we'll artificially create a loop in there, like the bottle of pouring wine, for example. This Emmys example here, this is something where we have simulation that's actually an animation added to the photograph. We're going to do that today. And then we have cinemagraphs that I don't really know if I would call it a cinemagraph technically. We're seeing a lot of these with Disney and Netflix, Discover Channel. All of these different emails that we get have a lot of these sort of motions in there as well. And they actually take a piece of video and just loop that a bunch of times. So again, there's no specific answer to what a cinemagraph is, but it's just all about that entire experience. So with that, that's enough slides. I'm not big into slides, so let's get rid of that. And let's jump in and take a look at a couple of different ways that we can start to put this kind of content together. So I'm going to go through a couple of different examples here. First, we're going to talk about how we can actually create animations and work with a timeline in Photoshop. Then we're going to look at creating a cinemagraph where we have a video and we capture a single frame of the video, mask out part of that image and show a video through it. You can almost sort of paint with video using a layer mask. We're also going to take some video and superimpose it on top of a photograph and create our own cinemagraph that way by compositing video with photographs. And then we'll also take a look at examples of simulation, stuff that you might want to do either in Photoshop or even tools like After Effects. And then I have a little bonus section at the end. One of the things that you can do with cinemagraphs is you can create these with your own phone. And you don't even need a tripod. So I'll show you some of that a little bit later as well. So let's jump in. Let me sort of set the groundwork here for what we're going to be doing inside of Photoshop. So this is going to be an example where the Cinemagraph is going to be created by using animation tools inside of Photoshop. So I have this composition here, and I'll just walk through some of the layers real quick. So I have a layer of this woman here in the background with her bicycle, taken from an Adobe stock image. And so I went through and just cut out the bicycle, cut out the girl, and put her against these oranges, which is a different image. The oranges have been cut out so that we can see through the oranges. So I have a layer mask here that is just cutting there. If you hold the Option key and click on your mask, Alt and Windows, you can see just the art of the mask. And then I just have a drop shadow in here of the inside of the oranges. So that's it. Pretty basic composition inside of Photoshop. I'm going to start by going into my files here, and I want to bring in this Photoshop file here. This is just the center of the orange. When I cut this out, I just went into here, used my rubber stamping tool, and I just sort of stamped out a bigger shape of this orange. Now it's a separate Photoshop file. So what I'm going to do is come up to the file menu, come down and choose Place Linked. This allows me to use Photoshop very much like we would use InDesign or Illustrator. I can place artwork in here and it'll be linked to the original file. So I'll bring in this orange shape. I'll click Place, press Return, and now I have in my Layers panel a brand new linked smart object. Now this is a smart object, so everything's being encapsulated inside of this layer. So if I run an effect, run filters on this, all of those are going to be non-destructive. And the other key thing that a smart object does for us inside of Photoshop when we're animating is it opens up new animation possibilities. So I have this center orange here. I'm going to drag this down into this layer group behind my shadows, hit the move tool, and I can move this around. And now I can see this showing up inside of the orange shapes. So I'm going to center this right here. Command or Control T to transform. Hold the Option or Alt key, transform from the center. And I'll just bring this down here so it fits sort of inside of that orange shape. And then press Return. Next, I'm going to come up to the window menu and come down and open the timeline panel. Now, any Photoshop file can have an animated timeline panel attached to it. And there's two different types of timelines. There's a frame-based timeline, which goes back to the old school animated GIF days, and a relatively new, quote, relative, since Photoshop 3, I believe. No, I'm sorry, CS3, which was Photoshop. I don't know what number that was, where we have this keyframe-based animated timeline panel, which works a lot like After Effects, Premiere, Adobe Animate, if you're using any of those animation software programs. So here I have this option here. I can choose between creating a video timeline or a frame-based timeline. So you basically change the drop-down menu, and I'm going to click Create Video Timeline. Now, by doing this, what happens is this panel will light up, and now I can see a timeline panel that I can click and drag. This is the playhead. This shows me what point in time I'm looking at. And every one of the layers in my layers panel is also replicated in the timeline panel. Same thing with layer groups. So I can see the tote bag promo, for example. If I open that up here and here, we'll see all of those are showing up. And if I wanted to create a quick animation, let's say I want to animate this pink box in the background here. I can select this pink box, open up the text box properties on the left-hand side here, and you'll see all of these little stopwatches. They got this directly from After Effects if you've come from the After Effects world. And if I come down here and click on position, for example, I click on the stopwatch for position, and that's going to create a new keyframe. So what I've told Photoshop basically is if I change the position of that layer anywhere along the timeline, Photoshop is going to create these keyframes automatically for me. So if I drag the playhead forward to about 2 seconds, looking at these numbers here, and then I simply come up with my move tool and I just move this, maybe I move it over here. Notice that Photoshop created a second keyframe. I've told it anything I change on the position property for this layer, create keyframes automatically. If I come back to 1 second and move this again, I'll get another keyframe. Then if I drag the playhead, I'm actually getting an animation between all those different frames. So Photoshop is actually doing the work for me. It's creating all of these different animations. Now, the things that I can animate are position, opacity, and style. Style includes all layer styles. So gradient overlays, masks, drop shadows, all that kind of stuff. Anything that is considered non-destructive inside of Photoshop can be part of an animation, which is super cool. You'll notice, however, that we don't see things like rotation and transform. That's because those are destructive. They're destructive because when you rotate a layer in Photoshop, the pixels are remapped from one spot in that image to another spot in the image. However, that's not the case with the smart object. So I'm going to undo back to the beginning here. And now I'm going to come in here. Let's open up my center orange. That's inside of my center mark. So I'm going to find that inside of my layer panel here. So here is center orange. Now, if I toggle this open, notice that I have this brand new option down here called transform. If I activate the keyframe here for transform, I can turn that on. Then I can come out. Let's say I come out to about 4 seconds over here. I'll hit Command or Control T with that layer selected. And now I can rotate this orange. So I'm going to rotate this 180 degrees. I'm going to press return. I still have to commit the transform. Maybe I'll move the keyframe back to about halfway. The whole thing is 5 seconds. Then I'll come out here again and hit transform and continue the animation. Just rotate this all the way around again, press return. And now I get this animation when I play this of the orange sort of moving. So the whole idea here was I thought it'd be really kind of fun if the oranges animated very much like the spokes of a bicycle wheel. So to me, I sort of saw the oranges very similar to the inside of a bicycle wheel. So it'd be kind of fun and really interesting to have this woman standing there next to her bike, but all the oranges are actually spinning and moving around. So that's how we can come in here and create an animation. Now, another cool thing we have with smart objects is smart objects can contain all of their same animation if we put them in another smart object. So I'll rotate that around so it continues to rotate in one full circle. So the entire orange is rotating. I'm going to come over here to the layers panel, select the smart object. I'm going to right click and we're going to convert that into a smart object. So now we're going to have a smart object of a smart object. And once we do that, all of the keyframes that I just created are going to now be in that new smart object. So I'm going to click on this and we're going to say, I'll convert to smart object. Now, if I drag the playhead, you'll still see that that animates, even though I don't see any keyframes. But if I double click this, here's my new Photoshop file with that one smart object. And you can see that actually just spinning around. So then what I did is I just hit Command or Control J to duplicate the layer, move this around into my other shapes. I can even come up to the transform. So I can go edit, transform, flip horizontal. So the second orange will actually animate. Let me move that back. So now they animate in different directions. And then I can come in here, get my mask tool, and I can come in here and sort of paint out the different areas that go outside of the individual oranges. Now, the cool thing is here, that mask is not animating because the animation is inside that smart object. So now I can use my masking tools to conform that to a particular shape and not affect the actual animation. And everything is being brought in from this one linked smart object from that linked smart object file. So I'll come in here and just sort of paint these around. So if you spend a little bit of time coming in here, we can end up with a final look. I brought in two different orange shapes. I have this sort of blood orange shape in the background here, but you get something that's just really kind of cool. And what I like about this is it's unexpected too. You don't expect the oranges to be rotating. You'd expect the tires of the bicycle to be animated. So again, there is part of that, sort of designing creative aspect that you can add into these as well. So that's one way that we can create a cinemagraph completely starting from scratch and animating everything inside of Photoshop. And you can do that with any Photoshop file that you have. Any layer can be turned into a smart object, or any layer can just be plain animated by opening up the timeline panel and adding a new frame-based animation. Now, for the second example, I want to talk about working with video. So I have this video here. So here is my friend Rocky. Rocky's a photo retoucher to the stars. He does photo retouching for Eric Church and Trevor Noah and a bunch of people. So Rocky's fancy. And he gave me permission to use this video that I took of him. And so what I want to do is I want to turn this into a cinemagraph. So he's moving in here and we've got the water that's moving. And this is typically where you would start with a cinemagraph that's based on video. Now, I wasn't actually using a tripod here. I actually stabilized this video, and I'm going to show you how I did that later on today. But for now, I have this stabilized. So if I come in here and play the timeline panel, if you look at the rocks, for example, they don't move around. So it's as if I was on a tripod. If you're shooting video for Cinemagraph and you can use a tripod, I absolutely recommend it. And you can shoot things with your phone. I take all kinds of videos. If anything that's animated and interesting, I'll take a quick little video. You want to take like 10 or 15 seconds if possible. I'll talk more about that as well. So let's go over to Photoshop. And in here, I'm going to start with a new file that's going to be 1080 by 1080. So this would be a square Instagram post. Let's click OK. I have the timeline panel is blank. I'll just close this up a little bit, move this down. And now to get a video inside of Photoshop, you can simply grab the video and just drag and drop it right into Photoshop. Press return. This will create a smart object just like we've been doing, or just like you can do with any other JPEG or other PSD file that you can bring into Photoshop. So now I've got my new smart object. I can see this over here on the left-hand side. I see this file icon here because this is being embedded into this file. But if I come in here and double click and go inside of the smart object, what I'll see is Photoshop actually brought the video in, created a smart object of the video being placed, and it turned on the timeline panel. But the timeline here is activated only inside the smart object. So we're going to need to activate it in the main file as well. But this is all the stuff Photoshop did just by simply dragging that video in and dropping it on here. So I can drag this back and forth and we can see the video here. So I'm in the smart object. Let's close the smart object. I'm back in the original Photoshop file. And now I'll just come down here and click create a video timeline. I want to work with the video in this timeline as well. So now with the smart object, I'll hit Command or Control T. Let me zoom out a little bit, hold the Option or Alt key. I'm going to scale up and I'm going to position him within the frame where I'd like him. Let's see, I'll bring him down to about right here. Get to that point and then click OK. Now, if I come down here and play the timeline in here, I can see this all running. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to find a frame that I'm going to use as the still frame. So if I drag this back and forth, there's one spot where he sort of looks off to the side, spot where he sort of looks away. And so I want to get something that's going to look interesting. We want to use this as a little promo for photography gears shop. So right here, this looks pretty fun. He sort of kneels down a little bit. He's really concentrating. So let's say that's the shot that I want. Now I'm looking at video on the timeline panel. I'm going to come over here to the layers panel and I'm going to hit Command or Control J to duplicate the layer. You can also drag it down to the plus sign down here, or you can go to the layer menu and choose duplicate layer. On the duplicate, you'll see on the timeline panel, the video will now move to the ending point of that timeline. Let me come in here and scrub the timeline panel down a little bit. I'm changing the magnification here. So wherever the playhead is, when you create a new layer or add artwork, Photoshop is going to put the end point, the beginning of that video or layer at that insertion point. So I'm going to click on this and just drag this back. Then I can come over here and find exactly the spot I want again. So I want it right about here, right where his knees are bending a little bit. And right here, I'm going to come over to the layers panel. I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose rasterize layer. What Photoshop's going to do is it's going to pull that one frame out of that video and apply that to the entire duration of this clip. So once I do that, the smart objectness goes away. I have just a plain old layer here. And now if I jog the timeline, I don't see anything changing. So let me magnify this a little bit. So drag this back and forth, nothing's moving. So here's where we can sort of paint in with video, which is super fun. I'm going to start by coming over here and creating a new layer in my layers panel. And what I like to do is come in here and just put a really bright, gross color in here. So I'll pick something like this. I'm going to fill that entire layer. I'll move this back so it's here the whole time. And I'm doing this just so I can see where I'm painting. Then I'm going to go to the top layer. I'm going to come down and add a layer mask. I'm going to hit B for my brush tool. Let's come over here to the brush settings. I want to choose a nice soft brush. Then I can use my bracket keys to increase and decrease the brush size. So I don't know if that's coming through on the recording, but I have a really large brush here. If I hit the left bracket, I can make it really small. And if I come in here and start to paint with black, so I have black on the foreground, have the mask selected, I start painting, I'm painting in this sort of pink area. So let me go to that layer. Let me change the opacity to about 50%. So I'll just hit M for marquee and then 5 for 50%. big fan of shortcuts. B for the brush tool, start painting. So if I paint a little area here and then come down to the timeline panel and drag this, you can now see the water showing up in the background. So since the video is so close to the still image, this is why I make that pink layer, just so I can see what I'm doing. So now I'm going to zoom up here, and what I can do is come in here and paint in this area. So I use a soft brush so that the transition between the video and the image are pretty soft, especially if we get like a little bit of water sort of splashing up on the rocks or anything on the side. That soft brush will give me this nice transition between the parts of the image that are static and parts of the image that are animated. So I'm going to come over here and just sort of paint here. Again, the cool thing is I don't have to be too exact, especially in these areas here. I'll just paint around, increase my brush size. I could certainly paint over the whole area because the rocks aren't moving very much. However, one thing that I've noticed is even though you have a video and a tripod, there still can be subtle light shifting, just really subtle movements where you're going to want to do this with the mask so that you can control exactly the areas that are going to move. And you know for certain that the rest of the area is going to be completely static because we actually captured that from a still frame of the video. So I'll come in here and just paint a couple of areas here. Once you get in here, you're looking at all these tones. If you can't remember what moves or what doesn't, you can always come back and just drag the timeline panel. I can say, oh yeah, so I need a little bit of spot there. And I can come in here and just start painting in some of these areas here. Hold the space bar, move tool, and I can come up here and just paint out all these areas. If you're not too sure, again, you can go a little bit wider. I have a really soft brush just to get the edges here. And we're coming in here basically painting with video, which is just really super cool. Let me zoom out here a little bit, increase and decrease my brush size. So you get the idea. So now let's come down here. Let's take a look at Rocky. So his legs were actually moving in here. And if I were to turn off these two layers here and just take a look, his legs are moving a little bit. Where his legs are touching the water, we don't see a lot of movement. We do see some movement underneath, especially when he sort of bends down a little bit of shading and shadowing happening here. But we are still working with that still frame. So I'm going to come back and turn these back on, and then we'll come in here and I'll just sort of follow these shapes inside of here. So I'll get down in here. When I get down here, I'm going to paint around this area here, but I'm going to keep the area where his leg is going into the water. So we've got that sort of natural transition point here. And I'll do the same thing back here. Soft brush, move this around, and then move this in. Now, one little trick I have, there's a little bit of a separation here, this little triangle spot. Now, it can be really difficult to come in here and sort of paint inside of this area here because I can't get that sort of corner point. So what I do for areas like this when I'm masking is I'll actually come in here, I'll follow this leg here, and I'm ignoring this leg for the moment. So I'm following sort of this path down. So you want to pick one side to do this in. I'll hit the X key, which will put white on the foreground and black in the background. And then I'll come in here and paint away the mask this way. So now I can get this nice sharp edge inside of here using my masks by painting in one area and then painting it out in the opposite direction and getting basically the negative space. It's almost like Pathfinder for Photoshop. So then once I zoom out, I can come in, go back to the mask, B for the brush tool, X to put black on the background, or foreground, I mean, increase the brush size, and then I can come in and continue to paint this out. So pretty quickly, you can take just about any image and get your Cinemagraph working in here. So I can paint out the rest of the shapes. Just do this really quick in the interest of time. Then I can come back, turn off the purple layer, come back in Photoshop. I'll click on the gear. I'll turn on loop playback so I can see this play. Then I come in here and click play, and we can see our Cinemagraph playing here. So that looks pretty cool, except for I have a couple of issues. One, I need to mask out some of the area here where it's actually moving his foot. But the second thing I want to do is when we get to the end of the video, the water doesn't match the first part of the video. So if I click between the first frame and the last frame, you'll see that there's a lot of motion, a lot of things sort of jumping around. So here's where we want to create a loop for the video. So what I'm going to do is decide on how long does this Cinemagraph need to be in order to sort of sell the effect. I'm always worried about file size. So I don't want to have a 15-second video if I can get away with a 4-second video. And if we need to save something out as an animated GIF for certain platforms or sending out an email, because email can't have video or JavaScript or CSS, any of the cool animation techniques we use on the web, then I'm going to be stuck with an animated GIF. So I want this to be as small as possible and as quick as possible. So for something like this, when I look at this, after about 3 or 4 seconds, that'll give me enough sort of variation in the water that I'm not going to be sort of fixated on it. I don't want to have it too short because then you'll see like a stuttering effect. But after 3 or 4 seconds, we're not going to pay attention to the water that much. We're not going to be watching every little wave. So for sake of argument, let's say I decide to make this only 3 seconds long. So if I were to play this, 1, 2, 3, that gives me a good amount of water and movement in here. So let's say I'll come back to 3 seconds. So I'm getting the timeline panel here, 3 seconds. I'm going to come over here and grab the top area of the timeline panel. This is called the work area. So this is the area that when we render this out or export this, this is what's actually going to be exported. So my timeline can be 8 seconds like it is here. But if I grab the work area and drag this back to 3 seconds, when I export this to video, it's only going to be 3 seconds long. So I can also come in here and change the duration of all my layers, which I'm not going to do except for this bottom one. I'm going to grab the bottom one here, which is the video layer, and I'm going to drag the duration so that it matches that 3 seconds. So I'll just move this in one frame here. So when we get to the end of this frame, so the play is going to stop here. Our video is going to end. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm setting what's called an out point. So whenever you take a video and you click the beginning or end point, you're changing what's called the in points and the out points of the video. And so that actually controls when the video will actually start and stop inside of these frames. So what I'm going to do is bring my playhead back to about halfway between 0 and 3 seconds. So right about here, I'm going to select this video and I'm going to come up here and click on the scissors tool. So what I want to do is I want to cut the middle of the video and I want to put the second half at the beginning and the first half at the end so that I know that the middle, since the middle will line up, that means that the end and the beginning will match. And then I can create a dissolve in between the center. So I can do that by selecting the video layer, clicking on the scissors, and the scissors are going to split this into 2 different layers. Now, if we take a look at the layers panel, we're still looking at all of the layers inside of Photoshop in sort of its layer and composition mode. But I'm going to come over here to the layer, to the timeline panel. I'm going to click on the top layer and I'm going to drag this down so that it's next to the bottom video. When I let go, notice that Photoshop now created a new type of group for me called a video group. A video group is a way that Photoshop will line up different videos so that you can use these in kind of a nonlinear editing environment, like you would like you'd see inside of Premiere Pro or Premiere Rush, where all the videos sort of line up and you can put transitions in between them. So if you put 2 video layers on the same layer in the timeline panel, Photoshop makes a video group. Now, the cool thing with the video group is I can come over here next to the scissors. I can click on my transition panel. I'm going to select crossfade. For the duration, I'm going to set this to 0.5 seconds. Then I'm going to grab the crossfade. I'm going to click and drag it right out of this panel and drop it right on the transition between my 2 video clips. Now, the first thing I forgot to do is I forgot to take the first one and move it over to the left. Let me undo that real quick. Command-Shift-G to ungroup it. So I know that the video, got ahead of myself. I know that the video matches exactly from this bottom clip to the top clip. And so what I want to do is take the top clip and move it to the left. The bottom clip, I'm going to move it over to the right so that now I know the end of these clips is lining up at exactly the right spot. This ending clip here is matching the ending of this piece over here. Now I can bring the 2 together, bring my crossfade, drag it between the 2. And now I get a half-second crossfade between the 2 of these. So if I go to the beginning and the end, those 2 match up perfect. And if I go between the 2, I'm getting a nice crossfade at 1/2 of a second so that you can't actually see the water changing very much. So I'm dragging this. I'm watching these areas here where I can see much more contrast in the video. And that looks really good. However, one thing that happened is since I took the two videos and overlapped them by half a second, I now have to come over here and lower my work area a little bit. So I'll come over here and just drag the work area back to this point. So now with that in place, I can come over here, turn on my loop, click play. And now I've got this perfectly looping cinemagraph of all of my artwork inside of Photoshop. Now at this point, I can add additional artwork and do additional things to it. Like I can bring in an Illustrator file. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to bring the Illustrator file to the top. Make sure that I drag it in the timeline panel back to the beginning. I can move this around, and then I can continue to work inside of Photoshop, just like I'll put together other graphics for my project. Maybe I'll bring the opacity back a little bit, zoom up here, add a mask, maybe select Rocky and do a select subject. Then come in here and apply a mask. I can come in here and fix it. And anyway, you get the idea. So pretty quickly, I can start from a video, capture a still frame, apply some masking, add some additional artwork, put together my entire ad campaign, and have the effect of the video playing in here that's going to grab the attention while still getting all of the speed of the original photograph. So another quick example I want to show along these lines before we jump in to taking a look at working with animation is talking about some types of video where you're going to sort of come across something that's not going to be quite as easy to loop. So I want to show you how we can get around some of those features. So here I have a video of our friends, Catherine and Dave. They gave us permission to not only shoot this, but use it in today's session. And so here I shot this on a tripod. So this is the actual picture of somebody took of me taking a video of them. And so basically I just sat there. I counted to 10. I asked them to stay as still as they possibly could while I counted. And then, just tried to have them not move and just stay still. Meanwhile, the wind is blowing as well, which added a nice little effect here. So if I come in here and take a look at this, I'll turn on the timeline panel. I just dragged in the video. I did all the things we did before. One of the cool things you see here is her dress is actually moving, which gives us this really sort of interesting aspect to this cinematograph. Dave is scary good at this. He didn't move very much at all. There's a couple spots where Catherine moved a little bit. She moved in a little bit here. You're always going to have people moving a little bit. And so one of the things I wanted to show you is when we have something like her dress moving, for example, I thought that was a really cool thing to have in there. And so in order to make it so that we could loop this and have her dress sort of flow out a little bit, but not sort of jump or have a bad looping point, was I have my rulers turned on and I came in here and I marked a part of the motion for the dress. So when the video started, the dress was in a state where it was sort of coming down from the wind. When I drag this out, we have a little bit of a wind here, which I thought looked really cool. Then we don't get a lot of motion for the rest of the video for the dress. So one of the things I would do is I would move this until the dress sort of is not moving too much. So at the beginning, I would pick this part here, and then I would drag a ruler down. And I'm watching the very top part of the bench after the riser here on the front step from the seat. Drag this piece over here. I'll make a crosshair so I know the dress is starting at that point. And then I'll drag this. And just like before with Rocky, I want to pick a spot where I have enough video so that this looks good. I don't need to have it be 20 seconds or anything. But I also want to make sure now that that dress is in exactly the same spot or somewhere close to this crosshair. Now, when I drag this out, that never actually happens again. So one of the things that I decided to do was I brought the video in a couple of seconds. And I figured I would start the video about right here. So I'm going to clip the first part of the video. I'll drag this back. Then I'll drag the whole thing to the left so that it's at the beginning of the timeline. And then I'll come in here, hit V for my move tool, and I'll adjust my crosshairs to the dress right here. So then I drag this, it's going to flow out a little bit. Then it's going to flow a couple of times. And I'm not seeing exactly the crosshair that I want, so I can do this backwards. So I'll go into about right here. So the dress is going to stay at this point pretty much all the time. Adjust my crosshairs, and then I'll work backwards. So I'll come back here to where the dress is blowing. Then I can come back and adjust this from the first part. So again, sometimes I'd pick like right there, crop it in, bring this forward. And then when I have a spot where the dress is kind of there, right before it looks like it's going to jump up a little bit, maybe about right here, I will grab the trim and the playhead and bring this back to about this point here. So then if I turn on my loop and hit play, if you're just watching the part of the dress, when we get to the looping point to the end and it snaps back around, we get this really nice sort of seamless effect for the different piece of the dress. Then everything from this point would be pretty much the same thing that we were doing before. I would come over here, Command or Control J, duplicate the layer, pick a spot where I like their smiles, right click, choose rasterize layer, add a mask, add a new color. And here I might choose like a lighter blue, fill that, make that about 50%, move this back. As you can see, you start to get really fast at this because the workflow is very similar as we're going through. So then I would come up here and I would start painting on areas that are going to move here. Now, another thing to keep in mind when I play this video is not only is her hair moving, but in the background, we have some of the trees and stuff moving as well. So I want to make sure to sort of limit the amount of motion to be the areas where her hair is moving. I want to make sure that I don't get any of her skin moving. So I want to stay away from her scalp and her skin and come in here. Dave's hair doesn't move quite as much, so I can sort of paint around in this area here. And again, I'm painting in the motion. So I'm painting in the areas that are going to be moving. So her hair does move in here and I can paint this around. And then of course I can always come down and drag this to make sure that I have enough sort of area here to support all the movement. So Dave's hair doesn't move much in there. I'll hit the X key, paint out, and you get the idea. Same thing for the areas of the water. I can come in here, click once, hold the shift key, the brush tool, X, click once, I hold the shift key and paint. I do this all the time. I cut out things really quick doing this, holding the shift key, clicking once, and then painting around. I'll do that for things like this too. I'll click once, click again, hold the shift key. I'll come over to here. I get the edge of the brush next to the subject. Click again. So I'm really painting with straight lines, but you really get this nice sort of cutout effect pretty quickly. Come in here, increase my brush, and then paint all of these. Then the last thing that I do, and this is kind of similar to what we did in the very first one where I took everything and put that into a smart object, is once I like this motion, I can select all of these layers. I can put all of these into a smart object. And then from this smart object, I can come over here, run my filter, run camera raw, and then I can come in here and make my color adjustments. So inside of the color adjustments here, I can make all of these adjustments. The adjustments are being applied to the smart object. The smart object inside of it has all of the masking and the trimmed video that I used to create all of these pieces and put all of those together. So by the time you're done, you end up with your final piece with all of your color corrections, your motion, the animation, everything moving, and you've just got this really sort of compelling image. And with this one, I especially like the fact that we've got the dress kind of moving here a little bit. Actually, let me open this up in QuickTime, go up to the view menu, turn on looping. This is how it would play on a social media platform. And then when this gets to the end, it'll automatically loop. So if you're watching the dress, you get this Cinemagraph where most things are not moving. And then you've got just the dress just sort of moves out a little bit, just adds a little bit of interest there. No one's fooled into thinking this is a video. I mean, we realize it's a photograph and it's got these cinematic effects to it. But again, it all goes back to that overall experience. What's going to make this interesting? What's going to keep people watching this? You're going to watch her hair. You're going to watch the water. Then you're going to see her dress. It's just going to add to the amount of time you're going to spend looking at this and sort of being mesmerized by all that motion. So with that, those were two examples of working with video. And again, you can take video on your phone, on your camera, whatever you want to do. If you have access to a tripod when you're doing this, you definitely want to do that. Put it on a tripod, take at least 15 or 20 seconds of video, even though you might only use 3 to 7 seconds, depending on what the motion is going to be. But that's just going to give you all the material that you need. Of course, you can download stock images and try that out, try some ideas with stock imagery, which leads us into our next example. And that is taking photographs and adding video to these photographs. So you don't always have to start from a complete video. You can actually start from something that is a static image, and you can introduce new artwork in here. Now the session is being recorded. So if you're watching this recording, there are some links to show you the exact Adobe stock assets that I downloaded for this. So if you wanted to download those assets, you can do that and follow along. And of course, you can do this with all kinds of different assets. So one of the things that you want to search for on one of your stock asset sites is some special effects videos. So for here, I searched for smoke and I put in the keyword of looping inside of Adobe Stock. And I got this video here of this smoke where the artist already set up this looping smoke against a black background. So now, as you may have imagined, we can use tools like the screen effect inside of Photoshop to knock out the black and get the actual artwork. And then we can superimpose this into our own photograph. And so this is one of my favorite ways to make cinemagraphs because I just have so much control over everything that I'm working with. So to start, I'm going to bring up this image inside of Photoshop. So we're starting with the static image here. I'm going to come over here and just drag and drop the QuickTime video in here. Let me zoom out. I'm going to scale this up. So I'll scale this up to about this point here. I'm going to press return, and that's going to give me a new smart object that I can see over here in my layers panel. Now, if I come down to the timeline panel, I need to create a new video timeline. So I'll click on this, and now I have a new timeline. So my timeline has my smart object inside of it, and I also have my layer for my photograph. So if I turn off that image as a background, I can see this image here. So now I can come up here, I can drag the timeline. Now the artist did set this up as a loop, and this is a 17-second video. So that's kind of a long time, but it does perfectly seamlessly loop. So if I was going to be using this maybe at a trade show, maybe it goes on a big like 75-inch LCD television inside of a trade show panel or inside of a marquee. In those cases, it doesn't matter what the file size is. It's not on somebody's video stream. So I can have this be 15, 20 megabytes, and when I render it out, and it'll just be beautiful as it runs. So again, there's no one answer for everything. You always want to take a look at everything you need to do. So what I want to do now is I want to conform this to the area here for the barbecue. So I'm going to select the video, and over here in the layers panel, I'm going to come over and come down and set this to a blend mode of screen. And so what screen will do is it'll take all of the non-black pixels and show them on the screen and take anything that's black and knock it out. And then it's also going to take away varying levels of gray. So 50% gray will go out completely. And then as we get closer and closer to white, we'll see less and less transparency applied to those. And then the opposite, the closer we get to black, the more transparent those pixels will be. So we'll end up with this really beautiful smoke that's already added on top of this image here. Now, this is a smart object, so I can hit Command or Control T to transform this. And I can even come in and hold my Command key on the Mac or Control in Windows, and I can skew this as well, sort of like an envelope transform. So I'm going to come in here and scale this down a little bit and really sort of distort this. I don't want the smoke coming out of anywhere that's not going to be inside the grill. So I'm going to come in here and just sort of conform this down to the shape here. I'll press return. I can still play the video. Of course, it's still going to play the way we would expect. The video is also going to be a little strong, so I can always come back here and change the transparency. So maybe I'll set this down to about maybe 30 or 40%. So it's just going to be really subtle. And I can also add a layer mask to this. So I'll come in here and add a mask. B for my brush tool, make sure I have a really soft brush. Hit the letter D to get black and white on my foreground and background, then the X key to get black on the foreground. I'll come up here and let me just paint a mask a little bit down here. Zoom up here a little bit. So as you're playing this, you can see exactly what's happening here. So this is the opposite of what we were doing before. I'm actually masking out the video with the mask instead of painting in a video with a layer mask. And so I can come up here and just sort of paint these areas here. I probably wouldn't see much smoke over on the sides here. You also want to search for videos of people barbecuing and see how smoke actually behaves. It's one thing to drop a huge thing of smoke on here, and that's another thing to make it sort of look a little bit more realistic. So some of these cases here, it gets really bright, so I might just paint some of this back a little bit. Now, the other thing that I would do that I think is really cool is smoke can actually reflect light as well. So right now I have a really sort of flat looking smoke effect here. So I'm going to bring the play all the way back to the beginning. I'm going to select this layer. I'm going to hit Command or Control D, or I'm sorry, J to duplicate. So now I have the video on here. I'm going to come over here to the mask and I'm going to fill the entire mask with black. So now the copy of my smoke, I can't actually see this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, get white on my foreground, and I'm going to paint some of the smoke in this area here about where the light is hitting his head. So if I kind of imagine the light coming in from this certain angle, I'm going to come up here and just sort of paint a little bit of extra smoke up here so that the smoke gets a little bit brighter in this area. I might even increase my opacity here a little bit, maybe up to like 70%. Hit the X key. Maybe I will paint this back a little bit. And this just gives you this really cool way of adding this volumetric effect to the smoke so that the smoke, when it gets to that area, actually just captures a little bit more of the light. And you can do that in a couple of spots. I can come down here and maybe add a little down here as well. And then maybe just a little bit up at the top here. So we're really adding this variation of light to this smoke effect, which is all being generated from this video that we brought into the file here. Then I can come in here and click play. Now for this one, I don't have to worry so much about the looping point because this will loop automatically at 19 seconds out here. But again, if you want to create a loop that's even shorter, you can use the same technique that we looked at with Rocky, where we actually split the clip, move the beginning and the end, and put a transition in between the two. That's a trick that you're going to use all the time for all of your different pieces. And then so maybe I'll come in here. Maybe the light wouldn't go out quite this far. You can do anything that you want. Drag this back and forth and take a look. So the light's a little strong out here as well. So let me just paint that light highlight back just a little bit over in here. So super fun. So many super cool things you can do. So this is working with special effects, getting special effects from different photo houses. Especially if the special effect is against black, you can use your screening tools to key that out. And the other example we have does something very similar with snow and putting snow against this graphic here. So these are the other two images that you'll find links for. So if you're watching the recording of this, you can pause this and follow along a little bit. One of the things that I would want to do with this snow effect is to sort of add this into the same scene twice. So for this one, I'm going to come in here and drag in the snow. I'll go a little bit faster here. I just made an MPEG-4 version of this just so it's a little bit, the file size isn't quite as big. So what I would do here is I would scale one of these up a little bit. Same effect. I'll come in here and apply the screen effect here. Bring up the timeline panel under the window menu, add a video timeline, and then we can do the same thing here. So we've got this snow that's sort of falling in front of her. Now, the other thing that I would do is I would duplicate this layer, Command and Control J. On the duplicate, I'll go to Select Subject. We want to select her out of this. We want to apply a mask. I want to put her in front of some of the snow. So for the snow that she's in front of, I'm going to actually come in here and scale this down a little bit. Maybe move this off to the right. So now when we play this, there's snow that's falling behind her. Then I would duplicate the video layer, move that above her. I'm going to zoom out here really far, hit Command or Control T, and I'm going to scale the snow up really big and move it over to the right. This is going to do two things. One, it's going to give us this nice parallax motion because we have video behind her and video in front of her. The video behind her is at about 100%, so it's going to fall at its original rate. But the video in the front, since I scaled it up, is going to give me the illusion of falling faster. So we're going to have snow in the front that's going to be falling faster than the snow in the back. So we're going to get this really sort of beautiful effect here. And if we have too much snow on the one in the front, we can always come in here, apply a mask, and I might come in here and just sort of paint on some of the edges here and maybe get rid of some of the areas where the snow would come in. So you might see some snowflakes sort of pop in and out. So you want to have a really soft brush. And I really just don't want to have any of the larger flakes over here on the left. I really want the larger flakes to just sort of fall in front of her and bring those over here. And then if that's too much snow, we can always move this over to the right. And the left-hand side has much fewer flakes than the right-hand side. And you can come in here and really start to put some of that content together. And then I might also duplicate that front layer a second time. And on one of these, I might use a really cool effect like color or linear dodge, for example, to give me some nice lighting effects that show up in front of her. Then grab everything, run camera raw, really pop the colors, do all that Photoshop-y kind of stuff to it, and just be able to work with all of those different compositions. So using special effects can really help with your images as well. And you will find tons of effects. There are people who have made looping water, snow, clouds, fire, all kinds of really cool things that can just really go a long way into helping you, add some of those special effects into some of your projects. I'm going to quickly peek over here and see if we have any questions going on. Oh, we do have a couple. Let me take a few here. Let's see. Do you usually use Photoshop to create your animations? Why Photoshop instead of Animate or After Effects? Well, today's session is called Working with Cinemagraphs in Photoshop. So I did want to show you all of the things that you can do inside of Photoshop. My personal favorite tool is After Effects. If you go to our website, we have a Cinemagraphs page here, which I'll bring up real quick. That page has tons and tons of different cinemagraphs that we've created, and a lot of these are done with After Effects. So I would certainly recommend, if you want to seriously get into creating animations, especially from scratch, and doing things like creating your own simulations like snow and fog with things like particle effects, absolutely jump into After Effects. But for today's session, I wanted to show you all of the things that you could do directly inside of Photoshop. And there are some things that you can do in Photoshop that you can't do in After Effects. The masking tools, the selection tools, are just unmatched inside of Photoshop. There's just so many things you can do. And then of course you can combine the two together. You could do your masking inside of Photoshop, do your animations inside of After Effects. So of course, there's certainly tons of ways you can do that. Let's see. Oh, somebody said, thank you for the definition of screen. No problem. Yeah, I learned that from somebody else too. So, we're all learning things from other people. So what I wanted to quickly show was a bunch of different ways that we can actually start to, create some of our own simulations too. So some of the things that we do is we will take these simulated ideas, create our own artwork for the simulations. And simulations are things like that snow, which is completely fake. That fire, or the barbecue smoke was actually real smoke that the videographer actually took and made a loop for it. But the snow was actually fake. It was part of a particle system that somebody put together, probably in After Effects. So we'll do a lot of the same sort of things here. So here we have a coffee house animation. The smoke in here was a particle system done inside of After Effects, put black on white. Then we brought this into Photoshop and did some of the masking there. And there's just a bunch of different things that we'll do for these different pieces. Sometimes you have to save your videos as animated GIFs. I'll talk about that in a second here. So this is the MPEG-4 version of that, so it can be a lot larger. This is the animated GIF that went into the email. And we've done a lot of these things. So we've done a couple of animations for different studios for Netflix to show how they can get some of these pieces running in there. If you've paid attention at all to email in the past year and a half, we've seen email go from these really sort of simple animated GIFs where you've got like a blinking button that says like sale next week, to Disney, Netflix, all these different companies using actual footage from their TV shows and movies. So we've really seen this grow from something that was really kind of little to something that is now using all of the same assets that the visual effects artists are using when they actually produce some of these television shows. So things like simulated particle systems, like we saw with Stranger Things, different particle systems, even adding things like smoke to these, where we can have these perfectly looped pieces, apply that to the photography that's already there, that are still frames from the actual television shows, and just put all this content together. So one of the things I wanted to show you real quick is Photoshop is the unparalleled tool for creating animated GIFs. So we do all of our email animations inside of Photoshop once we actually get our final video in place. So I want to show you this final coffee logo. So let's say this is the final animation. This was rendered directly out of After Effects. Now I need to get this into an animated GIF for publishing this in an email. So there's tons of different tools online where you can take a video file and just put it online and say, convert it to a GIF and get what you get. But Photoshop gives us the most amazing tools for creating an animated GIF. So I'm going to come in here and let's say we want to send this out. For the sake of processing time, I'll set this to a 600 by 600 animated GIF. Emails are typically around 600 pixels. And so I'm going to bring in the video file. So I do the same workflow that we do all the time. So the MPEG-4 can go out on social media channels and everything will look great. But when I need to send this out to an email, I need to compress this into an animated GIF format. And this is where I use Photoshop to do this. So I have the video here from the timeline panel. I just want to come down and turn the timeline panel on and just see how long the animation is. So this is 3 seconds long. Excuse me. So now I'll come up to the file menu, come down to export, and we're going to choose save for web. Don't be scared by the legacy statement inside of the parentheses here. This is still by far the most advanced animated GIF compression tool that I've seen. And I'll show you a couple of features in here that make it so. So I'm going to come over here to the format and choose GIF. And by doing this, Photoshop is going to automatically lock onto the fact that we have a timeline panel and that there's an animation in here. And it's going to create an animated GIF as opposed to just a static GIF file, or GIF for people on the West Coast or East Coast, wherever they say GIF. In the lower left-hand corner is probably the most important piece of data here, and that is the file size. When you're sending out animations inside of an email, especially Cinemagraphs, which email is by far the king as far as ROI and the amount of people who actually see content that gets posted, those platforms are going to have a file size limit on how big that file can be when they send it out, because this is downloading in somebody's email after the original message comes in. The message comes in, has some HTML, it references an animated GIF, then the server goes back and pulls that in, just like a web browser. So that is extra data that comes down, which is why we'll see file size limitations. So if your email campaign says, for example, this can't be larger than 1.2 megabytes, for example, I'm looking at this lower left-hand corner here. So I have 898 kilobytes. So I'm a little over halfway of my file size limit if it's 1.5 megabytes. On the top right, I have a bunch of controls here that you don't find in the other tools. First, I have a color table. GIF files are limited to 256 colors or less. Now they can be any 256 colors of 16.7 million, but it's still only 256. So if you've got a lot of subtle colors here, you'll start to see more dithering than if you have like rainbows and lots of colors, because the illusion, our eye will actually blend a lot of those colors together. So I can come up here to the colors. Right now we're at 64. Let me jump this up to 128 colors. Now I'm looking at the lower left-hand side. I'm at 1.1 megabytes now. I can come over here and click play and see how this is going to look inside of my final file. And I can also dial in colors one at a time. I can hit the up arrow and go to 129 colors, 130 colors. If I had a logo in here, I could select the color swatch in here and I can lock a color. So I have a little lock here. So if my logo, we used to do a lot of email animations for Adobe and they have their specific color red. I can come in here and lock all the red colors. Then I can jam down the colors to maybe 64, but those red colors wouldn't move. So you can lock individual colors. Then we have something called the dithering. So if I choose the dithering down to noise, this is basically going to add a noise pattern for all of the colors and create that sort of pattern. This is always going to give you a much larger file. So Photoshop is thinking about this for the moment. It will look the best, but it'll almost always be way over your file size limit. Give this a second here. So that came in at 1.6, which is a lot smaller than I thought. So if I play this, we don't see a lot of that dithering patterns. So if you can use noise, that is fantastic. If you can't use noise and you come in and choose a dithering pattern, you can also pick the percentage of dithering. So I can bring this down to 22% dithering, get a live preview, look at the file size. And then finally, there is a lossy setting. And this is invaluable to me because what this does is this allows you to compress the GIF in a similar fashion to the way JPEGs are compressed, where they sort of cost average all the pixels together to give you the file size savings. But this is a GIF file where we don't actually compress pixels that way. Every pixel is tracked and mapped to the color table. So the Photoshop engineers gave us this beautiful way to come in here and say, simulate like an 18% lossy quality that you would get from JPEG, but then apply that to your GIF file. And now in the lower left-hand corner, I got this down to 1 megabyte. However, you do lose some quality here. So you want to come down and keep clicking the play button and take a look at this. So it does seem like a lot of back and forth, but when you compare the fact that you're getting a live file size with a dynamic color table where you can dial in the exact number of colors, change the dithering 1% at a time, and apply a lossy effect over the entire compression scheme of the GIF, there's just nothing out there that is going to give you that much control. So this is what you're seeing when people are creating these beautiful animated GIFs from video, from television shows, from movie special effects, and getting these animated GIFs to look beautiful. They're using tools like this inside of Photoshop to take all of those great artwork that we did in the Cinemagraphs and getting that content over to these final files for delivery in those emails. And with that, Chris, that brings me right to the top of the hour. I'm peeking at the at the Q&A to see if I have anything going on. And
that's what I was actually going to ask you. So one other question / comment came in.
Oh, sure.
And someone found that even if they lock their colors, that when they reduce the number of colors, those locked ones don't always stay. So do you have any kind of advice or workarounds for that?
If you're hitting that, I would ask how many colors they're locking, because those locked colors will always get preferential treatment. So like if you locked one color and went down to 2 colors, that'd be one of the 2 colors that you got. However, Photoshop is always trying to evaluate the entire area. So if you're locking 30 or 40 colors and going to 20, you're going to lose something in there when you're going to some of those ranges. Other than that, like it shouldn't be losing a lot of those colors. And another thing that I'll say, especially when you're working with logos, like when we do some of these emails for Adobe, we've got that red color that's part of their main color, but I'll also pick a couple of anti-alias colors that are close to the red, just so that I don't get that sort of hard edge on some of those pieces. Animated GIFs. Yeah, there's definitely a dark art to animated GIFs. I mean, there's no one size fits all. Every email we do, I'm in there one at a time, finding exactly the right.
Slowly but surely.
Yeah, exactly. But
well,
awesome. It's a fun career. So.
No, hey, you're one of the lucky ones. And with that, I will have to play you out, Chris. Thank you so much for coming on to Learning Lens this week and sharing this with us. I know I'm going to have to replay this. And like Chris said, there's all those stock images that are up on his class page. Make sure you scroll down to the bottom and click the link so you can use them and play around yourself. I know I've got some homework to do. But so Chris, thank you very much. And before I let everyone go, I just want to say, please don't forget to come on back next week where we have another class. We're going to be doing freelancing in photojournalism. Tom Brenner is going to come in. He's a Washington, D.C.-based freelance photojournalist. Been in the White House, all that good stuff, all the fun stuff with the hookups. So come in, come with some questions, come to hear some stories, and come get some advice on how, if you're looking to it, you can break into that world as well. So have a fantastic day, everybody. Again, thanks for joining us. Chris, you're a rock star, and we'll see everyone again super soon. Have a good one, everybody. I feel like you just need anchor music at this point to like play everybody off. Oh man. Yeah, no, still need it. Levon, how we looking?